Hi everyone. Today we'll continue with a discussion from part 1, Satyajit Ray's The Golden Fortress. Now Satyajit Ray, when he was 44, he gave to the world and especially to Bengali literature two of his most beloved characters, Detective Feluda and Professor Shonku. Remember, we'd already discussed how he always wanted to revive his grandfather's Upinder Ray's most loved project, the magazine that he published for children, Sandesh. So the first story that Ray wrote was for this magazine, and it was a thorough hit. Feluda soon became the most loved and iconic figures of the time. Such was the popularity that Ray gave to the world 34 stories that features Feluda and his cousin Tapse. These were compiled later to form the Complete Adventures of Feluda in 2004. A reading of these stories also reveals the growth of Feluda, who in the later stories has evolved to be a thorough professional. Before we actually dive into these stories, let us first talk what kind of genre detective fiction actually is. It is a type of popular literature that basically focuses examining logically and with great detail the investigation and then focuses on solving the crime. Or as Darren E. Laws puts it quite simply, I came, I saw, I conquered. Conquered as in coming to a conclusion. So basically, the detective is doing three things. He comes across a crime or is called to investigate the crime. He observes closely and then he solves a seemingly difficult crime. Now, what kinds of crime does the genre cover? Well, it could be any crime, an abduction, murder, fraud, theft, robbery, and the like. But the most dramatic of crime is murder, because as we know here, the greatest stake is at play. So basically, detective fiction focus is on crime and the possibility of one or more people involvement in the crime, and yes, the solution. Besides these basic, what it resounds with is suspense, thrill, climax, and solution. This is actually what keeps a reader glued to the book. The detective story may either be a full-length novel or a short story. But in order that it may properly be defined as a detective story, it must contain the commission of a crime, the possibility of its having been committed by one or several people, its solution by a detective, either professional or amateur. When Satyajit started writing, there was no doubt that he was quite well versed with the theory of detective fiction and also influenced by it. So when he wrote his first detective story, he was aware of the generic conventions of the same. He brought some of them when he made use of a detective assistant duo, that is Feluda and Topsy, and this duo no doubt brings to the mind the celebrated duo Holmes and Watson. But trust Ray not to be an imitator. And hence, as a variation, Feluda and Topsy are cousins, although they are not professionals. Feluda, whose full name is Prathosh Chandra Mitra, is 27-year-old, while Topsy, whose real name is Tapesh Ranjan Mitra, is a zealous schoolboy who idolizes his brother and looks up to him with respect and admiration. Now, let's come to the novel. Let's see how it opens. Well, here I'm reading from the text. Feluda stopped reading and shut his book with a bang. Then he snapped his fingers twice, yawned heavily, and said, Geometry? I asked, Were you reading a book on geometry all this while? The book was covered with newspaper, so I could not see its title. So we see that the novel actually starts with the detective and is reading a book on geometry. This sets the tone of the things. Here is a detective who is out of the ordinary and who is described through the eyes of his adjunct Topsy. The letter then goes on to describe how passionate Feluda is about his books and how he keeps borrowing and reading books. And then further on, Feluda himself goes into lengthy conversation of geometry being present everywhere. I read once again. Feluda lit a charminar and blew out 2 smoke rings, one after the other. There is no such thing as a book on geometry, he told me. Any book may be seen as one because everything around us is related to geometry. Did you see those smoke rings? When they left my mouth, they were perfect circles. Now, just think, there are circles everywhere. Look at your own body. The iris in your eye is a circle. With the help of iris, you can look at the sun and the moon. If you think of them as flat objects, they are circles, but of course, they are spheres, each a solid bubble. So this continues. This erudite conversation about geometry makes us believe that yes, Feluda is not the ordinary man, but someone who is intelligent, who can be very observant, and he is different from other people of his kind. Now, that Topsy is in awe of his cousin come ace detective is clearly evident in the first chapter itself. When Feluda calls himself a many-pointed star and him a dot, he does not want to accept it. Again, I go back to the text. And he says, I like to think of myself as a satellite. The only problem is that I cannot play that role all the time. I managed to be with Feluda when he had trouble in Gangtok because that was during school holidays. And then he talks of certain cases that have done. And then the fact is, what we have to really observe here is the way he wants to be called satellite of the detective and not just a dot somewhere. So he wants to be someone who matters. Satyajit was clearly writing for young readers, so he had to throw many Western conventions out of the window. So while ensuring his narrative was thrilling and would keep his readers captivated, he also made sure it was without any trace of violence and eroticism, latter common ingredients in Western detective fiction. On the other hand, as in the Western model, Feluda remains the typical detective narrative. As a detective, he not only solves the mystery, but also takes over the narration at the final moment of culmination. By being a detective, he enjoys an authority that empowers him both as an investigator and as a narrator. So, Ray was successful in giving us an interesting young amateur detective who became quite popular and is bound to remain in our memories long after we really put down the text. So, more in the next episode. Have a nice day.